Hello everybody, this is Brett Lonsdale from Lightning Tools and welcome to another webinar. This webinar we're going to be talking about a new version of the SharePoint framework release of the Lightning Conductor. So the Lightning Conductor as a SharePoint framework web part, or client-side web part, we launched towards the end of 2018, so last year, and this is just another iteration of that version, which includes a couple of future features that you're going to see. One is working with the Graph API, and the other one is working with Microsoft Teams as well. So I'm going to jump into pretty much a live demo of both of those two features. Some of them are pretty much ready from our point of view, but not quite ready from Microsoft's point of view. One of the features, which is working with Microsoft Teams, we're not going to see for at least a couple of months just yet, but you will be able to use that feature as soon as that has been launched. So for those of you who haven't attended one of our webinars before or are new to Lightning Tools, my name is Brett Lonsdale, and I'm the founder of or co-founder of Lightning Tools. And we established the company back in 2007 in order to fill gaps within Microsoft SharePoint and make data available to users and to highlight that key data. So whether that is through our data visualization tools, such as our data viewer, the Lightning Conductor, which is exposing data inside SharePoint lists and libraries, or permissions and making that information available, and also getting information out of people's minds as well, such as their knowledge, announcements, and so on, into our tool Social Squared. That's pretty much what we're all about, and bringing that functionality into Microsoft SharePoint. So I've been in the SharePoint space for quite a long time now, ever since 2003, which is quite scary when you start to consider that over a third of my life has been spent around Microsoft SharePoint. And during that time, I've been quite active in the community, speaking at different events, also book writing, as you can see. I'm also on a podcast. I'm a show host from techsplaining.net. So if you are interested in driving in your car and listening to our podcast over your commute with regards to SharePoint and surrounding technologies, feel free to listen to that. It's in conjunction with a few other presenters as well, which is Mark Rackley, Rob Foster, and Stephanie Donahue. Okay, so that's a little bit about me. You can see my Twitter handle here, which is @BrettLonsdale. And if you want to follow me or also Lightning Tools, the Twitter handle for Lightning Tools is @LightningTools, which you probably could have guessed. So, yep, that's me. This is our company. Lightning Tools is a gold certified partner, and we're also Rencore certified as well. If you haven't come across Rencore before, Rencore is a company based in Munich, Germany, and they have an excellent product called SPFx, which is used to analyze code before you put it inside of your SharePoint environment to make sure that it follows all of the best practices. And we're happy to announce that we've been using that product ever since its inception or its launch. And as a result of that, we went through some internal audits, not just to do with our code, but also to do with our bug reporting processes, our help desk reporting, and so on. And we were awarded the, or first company to be awarded the development best practices, which is set to ISO standards. Okay, so that's a bit about our organization. What we're going to be talking about today, as I mentioned, is the Lightning Conductor, and I'm sure there's a few of you that are on the call that perhaps haven't come across the Lightning Conductor before. So what I didn't want to do is just jump straight into the graph or straight into the new feature of adding the web part into Teams without first of all just giving a quick overview as to what the Lightning Conductor is and the history behind that product. And then that's going to just take a few minutes before we jump in and have a look at some of these brand new features that we've been working on. So we'll start off with a quick overview of the Lightning Conductor so you understand what the products can do. And we'll also look at specifically working with hub sites and associated sites. So if you're using Office 365 modern sites, this will be familiar to you. Instead of using the classic site collections that we see in SharePoint on premises or classic SharePoint online, where we have these team sites which are also acting as sub-sites and effectively having a site collection. We have these new things called hub sites and associated sites now. So when you may have noticed, if you go into the Office 365, you click onto new site, it no longer asks you where you want to create that site. We're just creating that site, and it becomes effectively a new site collection in its own right. And with that, you don't get things like the navigation to subsites and so on. So this is why Microsoft have introduced associated sites. So we can basically have lots of different team sites that have been created, and we can associate them to a hub. That way you get your navigation. You also get some roll-up features out of the box with SharePoint, which includes things like events roll-up and news roll-up. But we take that a step further by also allowing you to aggregate content from hub sites, associated sites, and build views exactly how you want them. And that can be including view formatting and column formatting and so on, which you'll get to see in just a moment. So you end up with some very, very flexible views that you can create using the Lightning Conductor as a roll-up tool. And of course, it's not just supporting hub sites and associated sites now. We can still do all the things that we've been doing over the years, such as aggregating from site collections. We can aggregate across site collections and so on, which you'll again see in just a moment. So the new capabilities, one of them is working with the Lightning Conductor and Graph. So if you're new to Graph, Graph is basically something that we can use to get content from anywhere inside Office 365. So we can bring information in from Planner, or from Microsoft Teams, or from OneDrive, or from your Active Directory, and so on. Everything is security trimmed. The Graph API takes care of that. But what it means is you can really start to, instead of just aggregating content from the SharePoint lists that we've been doing up until now over the last sort of 12 years, now you can actually go through and aggregate content from other sources as well. So, of course, we have task lists is a good example of this. So many people have been using Microsoft task lists inside their SharePoint team sites for many, many years. But now there's some interesting tools coming into the Office 365 environment, such as Planner and things like that. So it might be that you're using that instead to manage your Teams tasks or even your personal tasks. So instead of not being able to see that information inside of SharePoint, we've made sure that you can by integrating with the Graph API. So we can bring that task information from Planner and display it with inside a SharePoint team site. And not just a SharePoint team site now. So as I said, when we're effectively waiting on some announcements from Microsoft at some point, which I would imagine would be perhaps sometime in the next couple of months. But once that announcement has been made, we're going to also launch this version of the product, which will allow you to also open up our client-side web part, our SharePoint framework client-side web parts inside Microsoft Team channels as well. So if you're using Microsoft Teams, you might be using Microsoft Teams to collaborate within maybe a sales department or marketing department, or whatever it might be, and you can aggregate not just a single list, which you can do out of the box. You can add a Teams tab using Microsoft Teams today and to display a SharePoint list, but you can display an aggregation of SharePoint lists using the Lightning Conductor within inside your Teams channels on the tabs interface. And that also includes the Graph API as well. So again, you could display all sorts of information from around Office 365 within inside the Teams tab and customize those views. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today inside this webinar. So first of all, quick overview of the Lightning Conductor. So the core focus of the product is really to aggregate content easily within inside SharePoint and then to be able to style it easily. And if we look at over the years, what we've had out of the box with Microsoft SharePoint, we started life with just the content query web part. So the content query web part, one of the issues with that was it was a single site collection roll-up. And if you followed best practices and had multiple site collections, that meant you couldn't aggregate that information. You could only aggregate with inside a single site collection. And to customize views, you had to write XSLT, and nobody likes doing that ever. So then in 2010, Microsoft launched what was known as the Content by Search web part, and that was a little bit different. We lost the fact that we're getting real-time results so it was dependent upon the search indexing to aggregate data, and still you had to build display templates if you wanted to have a custom view. So if you wanted to select your own columns, maybe add some styling to your view, that all had to be done using a display template. So that was the case through SharePoint 2013 and 2016 and so on as well. And in SharePoint Online, there are some roll-up tools. We have things like the events roll-up, which you may have seen, and the content or highlighted content web part, which you can also go in and aggregate content. But the things with that is, yes, we're seeing real-time cross-site collection aggregation, but we don't have the ability to customize the views at all. So you can't select which columns you want to display or add your own column formatting or anything like that to the aggregated content. And that's what we're bringing to you with the SharePoint Framework version, is the ability to aggregate that content however you feel fit. You can do it by content type, by list type. You can do any type of SharePoint list and apply styles to that data without actually having to write any code whatsoever. Okay, so over the years, back in 2007, we launched the first version of the Lightning Conductor. At that point, it was the only cross-site collection roll-up tool. So we launched that back then, and that was as a WSP. We did the same in 2010, came up with a new version which had contextual dialogues, which was great, meant that users didn't lose where they were inside SharePoint when they're clicking onto an item to open it. 2013 we launched with the ability to customize via JSON if you wanted to, and that allowed us to also introduce our own JSON views. So we had things like a calendar view and things like that was built into the product. And we were one of the first products within the App Store. So when the App Store launched back in 2014, there was just 10 apps, and we had 2 of them. One of them was the Lightning Conductor, and that allowed you to use search inside SharePoint Online to aggregate content across site collections. So those are still supported. We're still supporting the add-in. We're still supporting the WSP for those that have SharePoint on premises or classic SharePoint Online. But the SPFx version of the Lightning Conductor will support classic and also modern. So you can decide which you're more comfortable using, whether you want to use the add-in or the Lightning Conductor SPFx. And the Lightning Conductor SPFx has a lot to offer, which you'll see, and that's evolving to also support Teams and Microsoft Graph this year, which you'll see in just a moment. So we're going to jump into a demonstration, and we're going to add the Lightning Conductor onto a page, and just basically, like I say, make sure that everybody's on the same page as to what the Lightning Conductor does for you, and then we're going to jump in and have a look at some of these new features. So let's just do that. Let's browse to a site. And my demonstration environment here, what you'll see is I've got a hub site. It's actually a communication site called Contoso Marketing, and we're going to use that for part of this demonstration. And I've also got a couple of team sites which are associated to that hub site, which is Contoso Online Marketing and Contoso Offline Marketing. And we're just working with some tasks at the moment which are based inside the task lists of these 2 team sites here. And so you can see that information. What I'm going to do is go through and configure this web part. And the web part is really easy to add onto the page. It gets deployed into the App Store, just like a SharePoint add-in would be. And so if we wanted to add a new instance of the Lightning Conductor, we basically just click onto this plus icon when we're in edit mode of the site, and we scroll down until you see the Lightning Conductor. And once you select that, you'll have the Lightning Conductor on the page, and you can begin to configure it. So configuring it is really straightforward. We just basically click onto that configure button, and this brings us straight into the quick configuration. So what we've done here with the Lightning Conductor is we've made sure that we're not just building a tool for SharePoint professionals, but we're building a tool for business users. So a business user may be a site owner, and we're using terminology and a quick sort of several steps that can be followed to aggregate content very, very simply. And so what you'll see here, we've got some common scenarios built into this quick configuration. And so in the first drop down, we're asking what type of data do you want to see? So could it be documents or tasks or announcements, events, and typically some of the more common SharePoint lists. And if you're already using the Lightning Conductor, you'll see a few additional ones that are in here, such as messages and users, which are actually coming from Microsoft Graph, and we'll have a look at those in just a moment. But we don't need to confuse the business user by saying whether this is a SharePoint list or whether this is Microsoft Graph or whether it's using search or whatever. It's just this is the information that you might want to see, and so we're making that available. If you select other, then that basically jumps us into the advanced mode, and you really can get anything using that advanced mode, which we'll also be taking a look at. So I'm going to use tasks, since that's quite a common request. Is I want to aggregate my tasks. I don't want to go from site to site to site looking for tasks that have been assigned to me. I want to see them all in one view. So I can aggregate and display all tasks, or I could actually just display my tasks or my overdue tasks. And of course, I never have any of those, so we'll just go with the all tasks as an example. And then we have the question of where do we want this content to come from. So again, we've used this terminology to be quite simple. We can go from the current site that we're in, or we can go from the current site and its subsites if we're using site collections. We could aggregate from an entire site collection, or we've also got the option to go with the current site and any associated sites, or even the current tenant. And a question that often gets asked at this point is, well, if I'm using current tenant, am I going to see everybody's tasks? Well, security trimming is throughout the Lightning Conductor, so you're not going to see anything that you don't have at least read permission to. And even if you had read permission, then you're not going to see the ability to edit those items and so on. So I'm going to choose this option here, which is the current site and associated sites. And the last question we have is, how do you want to display this content? Do you want to display it in a grid view, or do you want to display it in a calendar view? And you'll see that this second option will vary depending on what type of content we're aggregating. So for example, if I go to documents, then I can see documents with inside a tile view, and so on. So we'll vary that depending on what type of list you're looking at. But we're going to start off with a grid view anyway. So simply just tasks, all tasks from the current site and associated sites, and I'll hit save, and that's it. Straight away we'll have some aggregated content. We can see the task name, who the task is assigned to. I can see the status of the tasks, the priority, the due date, and they're all green because, like I say, I never have overdue tasks. And then I've also got the percentage complete as well, so I can see which ones I've completed and which ones I have not. So in real life, you can have a lot more tasks than this. But what we can do is start to make that data stand out so that we can view what's important, make it jump out at us. So, for example, we might want completed tasks to actually just go away. Why are we showing tasks that we've already completed unless we want to feel good about ourselves? So we can filter that out easily by hitting the drop down here, going down to the column settings, and in there, sorry, under filter, we've got the ability to just filter out the completed, so we could say not equal to completed, and so on. But if we also want to, we can start to add some column formatting. So what we could do there is take, for example, the priority column. So the priority column, if we go down to column settings, we can select formatting, and in here we can choose our condition. So we can select from the choices inside that field, and even if you have custom choices in there, they're going to show, even if it's a custom column. And so I can choose high priority, and if it's a high priority task, then I want to maybe highlight that using an icon. So I can select an icon like this dot. I can make the dot red. So in here I've got a nice color picker. I can show just the icon, or I can also show the label. And if I'm showing both, then I can choose where I want that icon to go, in the top left, top right, just right justified, or left justified. So we'll choose save on that one, and I'm just going to add another couple of formatting conditions in here, and we'll set an icon in maybe yellow or orange or something like that, and I'll do exactly the same with this one. But this time the condition is different, so the priority is going to be normal, and the last one here we want a green, a nice bright green. I want to change the position of that, and that's for our low priority tasks. So so we can configure that very easily, and you can see here we've now got that conditional formatting. Maybe it would have been better left formatted so that they were justified, but either way, we can see that that conditional formatting has been applied there. And things like the percentage complete as well, I can go through and format that. So if I go to formatting on the percentage complete column, what's useful is, rather than just reading down all those numbers, is actually just have a visual representation, maybe using data bars. So if I add a 1 as the maximum value, I can choose a color, again using the color picker. Let's just go through and save that, and there we go. We've got some data bars showing us the progression of those tasks. So that's the sort of thing that we can build using the grid view and SharePoint lists that are coming from our sites there. And you'll also notice on the right hand side here that you can hide some of these commands if you want to, so you don't have to have a link to our documentation or to help or anything like that. You can show or hide those. Now, we can build several views inside the same web part instance. So if I just name this one all tasks, we could describe where those tasks are coming from or whatever we want to do there. And I have the ability to duplicate that view if I want to. So I can go through and hit the drop down and choose clone view, and that will build another view with exactly the same configuration, but maybe I want to change it slightly. Maybe I want to just show high priority tasks in that view using a filter, or maybe I want to add some grouping or something like that to it. So I could group by maybe the task status, so you can expand and collapse each of those groups. So I could clone it, so I get exactly the same, or of course I can add a new view to this. So what we might decide on is something like a tasks in a calendar. So in here, let's just go through and configure that quickly. So I'll choose tasks again, all tasks from the current site and associated sites, but we'll display those inside a calendar. So we now have this drop down where I can select these views, and we're not taking up we're not taking up real estate on the page. You can basically go through and select the view that you want, and it'll be inside the same web part instance. And you're also getting a performance gain there because we're not having lots of different Rollup web parts on the same page. We can get away with just having one web part, and that content is only aggregated when the view is selected. Okay, so that's really what the Lightning Conductor is all about. If you want to know more about the basic capabilities, we can do that. If you've got some specific requirements about things like document rollup or custom list rollup or anything, we're very happy to do a custom demonstration for you if that's something you want to look at. So now let's concentrate on some of these new features. So that's adding the Lightning Conductor, configuring it, and so on. What we want to talk about now is the Microsoft Graph and how we can use that to aggregate content from not just SharePoint lists, but from outside of perhaps the SharePoint environment. So some examples are OneDrive. We can get information from OneDrive. We can get information from Teams. We can obviously get information from SharePoint. We can get information from Planner and so on. And yeah, lots of different places. I selected just these ones, but yeah, we're really unlimited as to where we can get that content from. So we'll have a demonstration. I'm going to show working with Planner tasks, but yeah, there's some other things that we can do, such as OneDrive files, as I mentioned, the Microsoft Teams content. You can also get messages in the form of actual emails, which could be good for Microsoft Office 365 groups, so you can get messages from them, and we can also query things like Active Directory users and external users and things like that. And once we've got that content returned, just like I did then using the SharePoint list content, I can also go through and apply all of the styling that I want to using the grid view, or you could also go through and build your own JSON view as well. So if you want to get away from that sort of grid view layout like we did with the calendar, you can do so by creating your own JSON. Okay, so we could add a new instance of the web part, or work with the existing one. It doesn't really matter. Let's actually work with this one. So I will add a new view, and we'll go through and configure that. So This time we're going to jump into the advanced mode. However, just to point out that some of those graph ones are actually available on the quick configuration as well. I'm just conscious that we've not yet jumped into advanced mode yet. So if we jump into advanced mode, you'll see that we've got 4 different tabs down the left-hand side. The first tab, the web part tab, is just really some foundation properties that we can set for the web part, and the first one is pretty important. Where do we want this content to be coming from? So in your existing version, if you use the Lightning Conductor already, you'll know that we've got the search rollup engine provider, and we've also got the object model rollup engine provider. If we were using the SharePoint add-in, that makes a big difference. The search rollup engine provider could go across site collections, the object model could not. But here in the SharePoint framework version, you can go across site collections using both the object model and also the search rollup provider. And the object model is about 20 times faster than the add-in model was. The add-in version of the product. So really the difference between these two, it does still come down to performance, even though the object model is about 20 times faster. The search rollup engine provider is pretty much instantaneous to display results because it's already indexed. It's available, cached, whatever you want to call it. Whereas the object model, we have to go and query that content using the client-side object model. So it's real time to get the content back, whereas the search isn't. You could have a task, for example, that you completed. You were in your office, you completed a task, and then you left the office, and your boss is chasing you up the road because when he's looked at that task inside the Lightning Conductor, it's still marked as in progress. You didn't complete it before you went home. So if you were to use the search rollup provider, you have to live with that. It's only as up to date as the search indexing, which you have little control over using Office 365. But if you're using the object model, that wouldn't have occurred. He may have had to wait a few more seconds for the results to display, but he'll have been able to see that you completed your task. Okay, so we've got the object model or the search and also the graph now. And if we choose search, we'll just have a quick look. When we go to the data source tab, you can see here we're configuring a search query to get at content. If we were to use the object model, then we're using a list of different sites. So you can see here I've got Contoso offline marketing and so on in there, so I could expand these site collections and get to the sites within those site collections. Or if we go to graph, then when we go to the data source tab, we've actually got this view, which is what we want to focus on. So we have entity type. And if ever you want to play around with this, there is a Graph Explorer that you can go to. Just Google Graph Explorer, and Microsoft have built this query tool where you can go and test the graph against your Office 365 environment as well, and it will show you results. But basically, this is very, very similar to that. We can select from the drop down here the type of information that we want to see. So if I did want to see planner tasks, so if we go through and select planner tasks, and I have planner open here, so you can see here I've got my recent plans, or I can switch to all plans, and if I was to go into one of those, I'm not sure whether there's going to be much content. This is really just me playing around, but in some of these we're going to see perhaps some tasks that I need to work on. Yeah, you can give them a name, you can set the due date, you can assign them, and we can add lots of different tasks and see those tasks in charts and things like that. So that's what we're going to query here. And one of the problems with Planner is it's very much available inside of Teams as the tab, but otherwise you have to be in Planner to see those. Whereas if we're using a team site for our team, then we can see our team's tasks inside SharePoint, which is the benefit here. So there's a few different properties which we have in regardless as to which mode you use. So things like item limit per query and query timeout and things like that. But at the bottom here, we've got the query that you can add. So I'm telling it I want to aggregate planner tasks. And if I click onto that plus icon there against the query, you don't have to actually go through and build your own query. You can choose from our predefined queries. So if we're basically choosing a query, so there is only one to choose from here, which is user planner tasks. So I can select that, and we could specify who that user is, or I could leave it blank. And if I'm leaving it blank, it's me. I'm looking at my planner tasks. So so I'm just going to go with that. We'll hit save. You can see here that there's the query, so it's got me, planner, and tasks, and I can also go through and edit that query if I want to. And if you edit that query, what we're doing is moving away from the predefined to a custom query, and you build your own query text. So this is actually useful if you use the Graph Explorer. You can play around with that, get the information that you want, and then copy that query text into this field here and query that same content using our web part, and then you get to style it and so on with inside of SharePoint. However, I'm going to stick with a predefined one. So we'll select that. And if you had a custom one that wasn't valid, you'll see that we do the validation checker on that query. So this will actually change the icon to say that it's not valid and you need to go and fix your query. So that's our query there. And now when we go to the columns tab, we can go through and select from all of the different fields, if you like, available from that query. So so in here we've got quite a list. One thing you might notice is they're not obviously as nicely formatted as what we have as SharePoint list columns. But here I'm just going to go through and select some of the things that I want to see. So I've got the title, the start date, the due date, the description, and I also want to show % complete. There we go. So just like querying our tasks. So I can go through and select those, and I can drag and drop the fields into the order that I want them to appear in. So if I drag title up towards the top, that's going to be the first leftmost column in my view, followed by due date, in which case I might actually want start date to go first, then due date, and then details and description. So I can set the order, and we can go through and sort, we can filter, work with these. So you've got those capabilities, and you've also got the ability to add calculated columns. That's not just for graph, that's also for SharePoint lists or search if you want to. So if for example, you want to work out the difference between these two dates, the start date time and the end date time, you could do that using a calculated column, which you can basically just build that that calculation and add that to your view. So we have those selected. Then we can go to the display tab, and this is where we can refine the view. So in here we've got the display format. So start date time and due date time, that's going to show me a date time. So maybe I just want to show a short date. As long as I get my tasks done by the end of the day, I'm happy, not by a specific time. % complete, we could format that as a percentage or not, or just leave it as a number. By the way, that is a little bit different if you're used to using our tool against the SharePoint lists, the task lists. The maximum value is 1, it shows as a decimal, whereas when you're querying via graph, it doesn't. It's actually 100 is the value 100 for 100%. And so we can go through and set the display format for that. And then we can also go through and set a column alias. So because these don't look all that great, the labels, we can go through and pretty that up a little bit. So it looks a little bit nicer in our view. We can set column widths, we can do grouping, we can do the conditional formatting and so on like you saw before. So if we go for the % complete for an example, I could display some data bars on that, but this time I'm not setting 1 as the maximum. Like I said, I'm setting 100 as the maximum. We'll hide the value on that one. Okay, so we can go through and set that. And we've also then got other properties that we can set, such as the summary functions. So we could actually show maybe a sum, min, average, max count at the bottom of the page or the bottom of each group or wherever we want to do that. And then also some other properties as well, like sticky headers and maximum height of the web part, how many records per page you want to show, and so on and so forth, just to refine our view. So if I save this, we've got our new view. I just need to really give that a better name. So we'll label that as planner tasks. Okay, and in the drop down here, there's our planner tasks, which we can go through and select, and there it is. There's our information coming from planner. So we've got the title of all of those tasks, the start date, the due date, percentage complete, which is shown using data bars, and a description of what those tasks are. Okay, so really easy to create. We didn't have to get our hands dirty with any queries or anything like that, or also in building our display. So if I just go through and add one more, I'm just going to talk you through a couple of other options. So if we go back into the advanced mode again, I'll choose the graph rollup provider. Let's go down to the data source and I'll point out some of the different things that we've got. So here on user, as an example, we can go through and expand that query. So on the predefined, we can see a list of the current user or all users as an example. Or if we were to go to, we've got drive and also drive item, depending on what sort of information you want to come back from OneDrive, or we've also got messages and events and things like that that we can go through and query. And you can also get to your lists and list items and things like that if you want to, or even sites, etc. So in here we let's just go for drive item as an example, and then if I expand my query, you can see here the different options. So we've got recent files created by the current user would be one example. And again, I can leave that user blank. That's a valid query. And then when we go to our columns, you can see the different types of fields that we've got in here. So again, we've got a title and a description. Quite a lot of fields for OneDrive. So obviously quite a lot of time would need to be spent on trying to understand what some of these are, but some of them are obvious, like size. I don't see title, but anyway, let's just go through and accept that. I just want to get the point across that these are the sort of things that you can go through and query. So I've not labeled that one. We just call new view one. There we go. Okay, so a lot of them haven't got a description, but I can see a list of sizes. That's useful. We just need to figure out which is that title column. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of the sort of thing that you can do with Graph. Really, we can get at all sorts of information, including Microsoft Teams, as I mentioned. You could bring information back from that. All right, so let's move on. So that's a sort of quick demonstration of what you can do there. Like I say, you don't have to use the grid view. If you want to build a JSON view or anything, you can do that as well. So the next thing we want to look at is working with Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft Teams has really grown. There's been a lot of events that I've been to recently, Microsoft Ignite or the Microsoft Ignite tour in London, and also Microsoft Ignite in September last year, and also some SharePoint Saturdays. And you see when a speaker asks how many people in the room are using Teams, I see almost every hand raise. And there were some interesting figures shown from Microsoft at Microsoft Ignite that shows, I think it was something like 300,000 organizations are using Microsoft Teams now. So it's something that's growing very, very rapidly for collaboration. And one of the areas that is being developed at the moment is to be able to build using the SharePoint framework your client-side web parts that can be displayed within inside the Teams environment as a tab. So that gives you, as a developer, the same development platform for both Teams and also for SharePoint. So you can build one piece of logic if you want, one component that can be displayed in both of those places, either a SharePoint Teams page, sorry, a SharePoint site, or a Microsoft Teams tab. Okay, so yeah, so what we're going to look at is displaying the aggregated content within inside a Teams tab. So what I'm going to do here is just drag across a different window because I'm in a different tenant for this demo. And what you'll see here is this isn't the only web part that we've been working on. If you're familiar with our Social Squared tool, that is also available as a Teams tab. tool. So that gives us the ability to work with different forum groups and forums. So you get a structured platform where people can ask questions and receive answers, and you can navigate to the relevant place to be able to see replies and things like that, which is useful. And also our data viewer. And if you're interested in seeing the work that we've been doing on our data viewer, I'm going to be showing that in a couple of weeks' time. There's a webinar which I'll share with you at the end. And the data viewer has really evolved from displaying line of business data from data sources such as business connectivity services or SharePoint lists to also taking things like PCS, OData, SQL Azure, and so on, and making that data available inside your SharePoint environment. But rather than just giving you the ability to display that content within inside a grid, you can also go through and build a chart. And this is something that we'll go into detail on next week's, in a couple of weeks' time. So here we could go through and select where we want content to come from. We can choose between a grid view and a charts view. So this is obviously using the charts view. You'll see we've got a data source set there, which is actually a list called sales. And we've got our columns selected from that sales list that we want to work with. And then we can go through and build and configure a chart. So we can go through and format any part of this. We can change from the things like the combo charts to pie and donut charts and so on, and then basically build a chart by selecting the columns that we chose and choosing how they're displayed here. So we can show, in fact, profit as an area makes sense, and we can choose the color of that area. So again, the rotten green comes out. We can show the cost of sales, as a blue line, that sounds good. And then we could show the actual sales here as a column and choose our color for that. So I don't know, purple. So there's our chart configured, and we basically hit save, and there it is. So we can work with with data in that way. So the Lightning Conductor has followed suit. So you'll notice here when I click onto add a new tab, you've got all the regular tabs that Microsoft offer, so things like Planner, Power BI, a Word document, Wiki, and so on and so forth. And there is SharePoint document library in here. There's also a SharePoint list that you can go and display as a tab. But what we're offering is not just a SharePoint list, but a aggregated list. So with the Lightning Conductor, you can go through and select that. And you'll notice that the the configuration doesn't look that great. This is not our fault. This is something that we're waiting for Microsoft to improve upon. It's actually waiting for the next version of the SharePoint framework, and this configuration will look a lot better once the next version of the SharePoint framework is out. And this is what's holding us back from launching this version. We're just waiting for that announcement from Microsoft so we can go through and make this available for you. So in here you'll see the same options. So I've got a default view, and I can go through and configure that view. So here, if we just want to go and do that tasks view, I can select tasks. I could show all tasks from maybe the current tenant and display those in a grid view. And we can hit save or go into the advanced mode, whichever one we want. So I'll just hit save, in fact, and just give that a moment. And that goes through and queries our data and displays it with inside Microsoft Teams. You'll notice that you've got the same options. So in here we can go through and filter or advanced filter or sort and so on. The one thing you will be missing right now is the ability to go back into the configuration. We just haven't added that yet, and the reason for that is that there will be changes in the way that Teams can be or Teams components can be configured. So from a development point of view, you can actually specify different things to happen with inside the web part, whether it's inside the SharePoint environment or whether it's inside the Teams environment. So that's what we need to do, so that you have a nice Teams way of configuring the Lightning Conductor, and you have a nice SharePoint way of configuring the Lightning Conductor. But like I said, we're waiting for the next iteration of the SharePoint framework before that will be fully supported. So anyway, you have the capability of using this, and the way that this is deployed is just like exactly like the SharePoint client-side web parts. You add them to the App Store, but what you will notice here is you also have your own organization store. So we can go to the organization store for Microsoft Teams, and you can upload a custom app. So the main client-side web part package goes into the App Store, but you also have a manifest along with the icons, which are in a zip file that you then upload to here. So I can go to upload for me and my teams, or upload for Lightning Tools tenant, and that becomes available then to anybody to use with inside their own Microsoft Teams sites. Okay, so that's a quick tour of those new features. Obviously, we just did the demonstration there. The next webinar, like I say, is in a couple of weeks' time. So that's on the data viewer client-side web part. We'll also be showing that in Teams, and you just got a snippet of that. But you'll also be able to see in a lot more detail some of the features, such as the charts and things like that, that we can go through and configure with inside your Office 365 environment. So really the thinking behind that one is, as a company, we provide tools that allow you to query your data very easily by a business user. And a lot of business users don't have the capability of using Power BI. So this is really on a different scale. It's Power BI is extremely powerful, but if you just want a very simple chart based on some lists, or based on a database or something like that, and you want to configure it like you would do an Excel chart, that's kind of like the audience for the data viewer. But you also have that ability for displaying the data with inside a grid as well. Okay, so that's the next one. At this point, I'm open for questions. So yeah, we've got just over 10 minutes for questions. What we will do is, if you do have a question, you can raise your hand using the GoToWebinar software. So you should see a button in there that allows you to do that. And if you do raise your hand, I can unmute you and you can ask your question. And I'll leave that slide up as well. So if you do want to join the next webinar, the data viewer, feel free to join that. Whilst I'm waiting for hands to be raised, I'll also point out that if you go to our website, so that's lightningtools.com, and click onto webcasts, you'll also see, just in case you missed it, that last week or the week before, Mark Rackley, another SharePoint MVP and also Texplaining host as well with me, he did a good introduction to the SharePoint framework and what it is. So if you missed that, you can go back and watch it, and that will hopefully give you not just the benefits of our products, but also the benefits of developing products inside the SharePoint framework development model. So it looks like we've got at least one hand raised. That's from Mitch Schultz. So I'm going to unmute you, Mitch. Hello, Mitch.
Hey, Brett, how you doing?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
Just fine, just fine. As you know, I'm a loyal user, currently on the previous version. Can you speak to the upgrade path for taking advantage of all of this stuff for an in-place customer?
Yes, absolutely. So basically, one of the benefits of the so that's just typical, isn't it? Your phone's going to phone just as you're on the as you're muted. But yeah, so the way that SharePoint framework model works is basically you don't have to do anything. So if you are using the SharePoint framework, the previous version of the client-side web part, then you will have these features appear as you would do with inside Office 365. So we'll notify you of that, that the new features are coming, and they will appear. If you're moving from the SharePoint add-in or the WSP, then you can move to the client-side web part version, and you have the ability to export your configuration from both the web part and the add-in, and import that configuration into the client-side web part. So any configuration, such as what columns and what list you're aggregating from, they will be imported, and you'll have that same configuration.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thanks, Mitch. Okay, looks like we've got a question from Kate at Bugaboo. So Kate,
Hi.
hey Kate, how you
Hi,
doing?
Brett. I think we've spoken before when we first bought your product. I have a big. We've just gone from online, and on premise, and I'm walking towards going online into the cloud. People have advised me that maybe it would be better to uh, depart from task lists, which we now heavily use. And I wanted to use your tool to create aggregation. But I see that the planner has sort of limitations in customized columns. So I was wondering if there was a sort of way in which you could marry or bring in tasks from planner, say if people would like to use that tool for their task and task lists. Is there a way to bring them together in one overview, or would you have to work or in planner or in task lists?
Great question. So, if you are aggregating from lists, you can go across different types of lists. So I could, for example, go from project tasks and tasks lists and build those into one view, but we can't cross the boundaries of the Rollup provider. So you would need to, have those. You could potentially have them inside the same web part, but as different views. As we did in the demo here. So you could have SharePoint listed tasks and planner tasks as two different views that you could select from, if that helps. But
Okay.
that's as close as we could get to, I'm afraid.
Okay. No, understood. I thought as much. Is there also, do you guys also have more experience about Planner and the things that would be possible within Planner? I know that's not.
Not a great deal, but let me look at some resources and I can certainly help point you in the right direction. I'd
Okay,
be happy to do
cool.
that.
That's fantastic. Thanks a lot.
No problem. Okay, we'll do that. Thank you. Okay, so let's just see if we have any other questions there. So two good questions. It looks like that's it for now. Sorry, James Alyssa. Hi, James.
Hi, so just a quick question. Do you guys have a recommendation on the number of columns that we should have? Like I did our migration last week, and what I noted is if you put way too many columns on the new modern page, you get the side scroll bar. So is there like a recommendation, what you would recommend for total number of columns? Because like I know some of our Lightning Conductor rollups have got a lot of columns, and it seems with the modern page, if you just create a modern page on a classic site, then you've got that white space that's on the right-hand side, which you really can't do anything with because that's by design. So do you guys have like a recommendation how many columns you should put in?
That's a good question. I'm not able to answer off the top of my head, as opposed to the number of comments. I am aware that we did at one point have a bug with the horizontal scroll bar, so I'm not sure if that's the same thing. But once again, I'll jot that down. I'll come back to you on that one if that's okay.
That's fine.
All right. Thank you very much, James.
You bet.
Okay, I think that was it for questions. So, if you do think of any questions, please email me on brett@lightningtools.com. So that's brett@lightningtools.com. I'll be very happy to forward that to somebody else. No, sorry, I'll be happy to answer your question. I can certainly do that in the next couple of days. And hopefully you enjoyed the webinar. The webinar was recorded, so I'm going to post that up onto our website so you can share that with any colleagues that may also be interested in looking at the product or anything like that as well. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Really do appreciate it. And if you want to see our next product, the Data Viewer, please feel free to sign up. And I also forgot to mention the Social Squared as well, if that's of interest. We've got a webinar of that at the beginning of April. So that'll be also on our website on the homepage. If you scroll down to the bottom, you're going to see the Social Squared webinar announcement, and also just something for food for thought. With getting very close to the launch of our DeliverPoint permissions management tool for under the SharePoint framework as well. So we're hoping to display that for the very first time at the SharePoint Conference North America, which is happening in Vegas towards the end of May. So if you also happen to use DeliverPoint, then come along and see that at SPCNA if you're going to be around at that event. Other than that, thank you very much, and see you all soon.